Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the David C. Hardesty Jr. Festival of Ideas at West Virginia University. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the WVU Center for Civic Engagement as part of Week of Engagement. For more than a decade, the Festival of Ideas has enriched students' education and broadened their thinking on the day's most important issues. As a WVU student leader in the 1960s, David Hardesty organized the first Festival of Ideas. Nearly 30 years later, he returned to his alma mater as its university president, and in 1997 relaunched the festival as an annual event, drawing renowned speakers to campus each year. Festival speakers have come to our campus from around the world, from diverse backgrounds and right in our own backyard, featuring some of our nation's most brilliant thinkers. Tonight, we welcome Charles Best, educator and founder of DonorsChoose.org. Following Mr. Best's lecture, he will take questions from the audience. At that time, we ask you come forward to one of the two microphones at the front of the room. Our event tonight is being webcast live at webcast.wvu.edu and will be posted for future viewing on YouTube following the event. During this event, we encourage you to share your thoughts via Twitter using the hashtag WVUIdeas. To encourage active participation and giving, Donors Choose has graciously provided a $10 gift card for every member of the audience tonight to encourage you to find your own special project to contribute to. And of course, you can always give more. Please see one of our student ambassadors at the end of the evening for your gift card. And now, to help introduce tonight's guest, please watch this video. Thank you.
There are few times in history when the saying, "we're all in this together," would be more applicable than right now.
Charles Best, he came up with a revolutionary idea during lunch in the teacher's lounge.
My colleagues and I were talking about books that we wanted our students to read, field trips we wanted to take them on, art supplies that we needed, but these ideas wouldn't go beyond the teacher's lunchroom. And then I just figured that there were people from all walks of life who wanted to help improve our public schools.
Through Donors Choose, ordinary citizens can directly fund projects initiated by enterprising public school teachers.
Teachers request dictionaries, science kits, field trips, resources that their students need to thrive. Then you can give to the project request that most inspires you with a donation of any amount. And DonorsChoose.org delivers the materials to the school.
It's such a simple, wonderful idea. It connects individual donors with individual classrooms and individual teachers and individual projects. You know exactly who you're helping and how you're helping them.
It's tough getting a dollar. I don't like to give them all away, so if I do, I'd like to know where it's going.
When I started teaching last year, I didn't have any books for my students.
It put the supplies in my classroom within 2 weeks.
An art class in the Bronx had no paintbrushes, and now every single student has a set.
If you took a picture from the beginning of the year and now it's like empty and full.
You as a donor can expect to get photographs of the activity taking place, student thank you notes, a teacher impact letter, illustrating, proving the impact that you've had.
The thank you cards from the children are awesome.
Because I love to give and know that I have a connection.
Get you right there.
It's a very easy way to give back to public schools.
And I think that takes the best of what the internet offers, an ability for people to self-organize around communities of shared concern.
This is exactly the kind of social innovation we should be encouraging across this country.
I love DonorsChoose.org, and it's why I'm on the board and why I'm committed to helping it in any way I can.
Make sure you check it out, DonorsChoose.org.
Let's not underestimate the power each of us has to change the world for someone.
Hi. I'm Charles Best. Gretchen, thank you for that introduction. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks especially to each of you for sparing a bit of your evening tonight. I'm honored to be here. My colleagues and I were able to visit Preston High School this afternoon in Kingwood. And tonight for dinner, we were able to talk with some of the professors here, and you've made us feel wonderfully welcome. Thank you. So let's get started. Show of hands. How many of you know about Kickstarter? Who here has heard of Kickstarter? All right, so not a majority of you, but a decent number of you. For the majority who didn't raise their hands, Kickstarter is a funding platform for creative projects. Last year alone, people raised over $100 million through the site. Let's look at a few of the projects that people here in West Virginia have gotten funded through Kickstarter. Tracy Ann, in the upper left, Tracy Ann in Huntington is an aspiring country singer. She got her start singing in church. So she posted a project for the $5,000 she needs to record an album. That black image you see is a t-shirt created by someone who loves punk rock, loves West Virginia, and combined those two passions in a project called West Virginia Misfits, which requested $400 to do a run of t-shirts with that design. The West Virginia Storytelling Project is from a woman in Charleston who raised $1,000 so she could shoot interviews with storytellers and translate old stories and legends into animated short films. She's kicking off the project at the West Virginia Liars Competition, which I understand is a gathering of storytellers from across the state. That last image was taken by a woman in Bolo, West Virginia, who requested $3,500 so she could finish a documentary on one of the last churches where they handle snakes as part of their worship. Serpent handling, I think they call it. This is a documentary about the struggle of a so-called fringe religion maintaining its congregation in the age of technology. You should watch the video, it's pretty crazy. Only 5 years ago, these creative people would have needed a rich uncle or Hollywood connections or years of working their way up the ladder before they could have done these projects. Kickstarter has done away with all that. It lets you appeal to your friends, go straight to the public for support without the industry standing in your way. If your project is awesome, it'll probably get funded. Another show of hands. How many of you know about Etsy? Interesting. More people know about Etsy than about Kickstarter. Here might be one reason. Etsy is a marketplace of things that are made by hand. Last year, people bought and sold $500 million of handmade goods through the site. Now, did you know that there are more than 1,000 different products on Etsy from crafters here in Morgantown? Not just West Virginia, but Morgantown specifically. We're looking at 4 of them. Those note cards, that handbag, that bracelet, that t-shirt, were made by people who used to work office jobs all day. They only crafted as a hobby in their spare time, as a way to make gifts for friends and family. Then these crafters could never have scored the investment that you need to make a prototype that a factory can manufacture. They never could have persuaded Macy's or Walmart to sell their product. They couldn't have raised millions of advertising dollars to get people to buy their product. That's a process which only lets a lucky few become fashion designers or jewelry designers. And it's a process which can suck the personality out of your creation. Then Etsy came along. And now these crafters can pursue their passion as their day job, selling their handmade creations to people all over the world. They don't have to break through the barriers that, until recently, stood in the way of anyone who wanted to make beautiful things for a living. There's a change underway, which I want to talk about with you tonight. It's a change in how long you have to wait, and who you have to know, and how lucky you have to be to bring a good idea to life. It's about a new kind of marketplace where there are no gatekeepers standing in your way. DonorsChoose.org is a pioneer of this movement. So I want to share the journey with you, how we began, how we took off, and what I want you to leave with tonight. One more show of hands. How many of you had a teacher in high school who made a huge impression on you? Someone you wanted to be like? I'm hoping it's all of you. Or not all of you, but a majority. For me, that teacher was Mr. Buxton. He was my English teacher and my wrestling coach. When I arrived at high school as a dorky freshman, he talked to me like he would to an adult. If he approved or disapproved of something I'd done, I knew it right away, because he didn't put on that mask that some teachers do when they're talking to kids. If I asked him a question on Wednesday, he'd come back to me on Friday saying that he had thought about it, and he really had. He made you feel like he wanted you on his team. Looking back on it, I think it was Mr. Buxton who made me want to be a teacher. So 12 years ago, I began teaching history at Wings Academy, a public high school in the Bronx. Now, the school where I was teaching, this high school in the Bronx, did not have the same resources as the high school that I'd gone to. Where I'd gone to high school, we went on field trips into the woods. We had graphing calculators for trigonometry. We had all the supplies you'd need to do just about any art project. We did not want for anything. But when I started teaching in the Bronx, I saw firsthand that all schools are not created equal. My colleagues and I would talk in the teacher's lunchroom about going into our own pockets for copy paper and pencils. We often couldn't get the resources our students needed or do the projects that would get them excited about learning. We'd talk about books our students ought to read, a field trip we wanted to take them on, a microscope that we needed to bring science to life. I figured there were people out there must be people out there who'd love to help us if they could see how their money was being spent. So I used pencil and paper, and I drew out this website where public school teachers could post classroom project requests, and donors could choose a project they wanted to support. For $2,000, this programmer recently arrived from Poland was willing to build the site, and it was super rudimentary. The back end of our site was one page that you'd scroll down for like 15 minutes to get to the teacher or the project you were looking for. To process a donation, I had one of those black boxes that you see at the grocery store where you punch in the credit card number and the dollar amount and you send it over a telephone line. It was like PayPal, but by hand. And it was a really good thing that my students were helping to launch the site. So then I had to get my colleagues to try out this website to post the first projects. So I asked my mom to make the dessert that you see behind me. Roasted pears with apricot jam and orange rind. They taste something awesome. I brought this dessert. I put it on the table of the teacher's lunchroom. And before my colleagues could scarf it down, I said, hold up, there's a toll. Anybody who eats this dessert, if you eat one of these pears, you've got to go to this newly created website called donorschoose.org and ask for whatever it is you most want for your students. Post the project you've always wanted to do with them. The health teacher was the first to eat the dessert, and she she wanted to do a pregnancy prevention project for which she needed baby think it over dolls, which are life-size, life-weight dolls that cry at 3 in the morning and need to be fed and show a teenager that they don't want to get pregnant anytime soon. The English teacher, he ate the dessert. He posted a request for SAT review books. The art teacher wanted to make a 20-foot by 30-foot quilt with her students, and for that, she needed fabric and thread and needles. My aunt, who's a nurse, and my uncle, who's a minister, funded the first project together. But I didn't know any more donors to fund the other 10 projects. So I funded them myself, which I could afford to do because I was still living at home with my parents. I donated anonymously, so my colleagues mistakenly thought that the website actually worked, and that there were all these donors on the site just waiting to fulfill teachers' classroom dreams. So false rumors spread across the Bronx, and hundreds of teachers started posting projects on our site. I was in a really tough spot because I did not know how I was going to get those projects funded. My students came to the rescue. They saw the potential of this experiment to change their lives at school. And I think they felt a little bad for me. So for 3 months, they volunteered after school every day to spread word to potential donors. They addressed and compiled 2,000 letters by hand to people all over the country, telling them about this website where somebody with $10 could be a classroom hero. Incidentally, we got the addresses out of my college alumni directory, which wasn't strictly legal, but the big rule was against mechanical reproduction, scanning and photocopying the addresses, whereas we were manually reproducing these addresses by hand. At least that was going to be our defense if we were caught out. We needed to get the cheapest postal rate, so we sorted the mail ourselves, and every desk in my classroom represented a different postal region. We carted the sorted letters to the post office, and we crossed our fingers. It worked. My students' efforts generated $30,000 in donations to projects on our site. We were on our way. Then 9/11 happened, and teachers at the public schools beside Ground Zero started posting projects for recovering in the wake of the attacks on the World Trade Center. A math teacher requested a new set of calculators because her student's original set was sealed at the disaster site, and their classroom had been relocated to a basement. A high school teacher wanted to bring in an Afghani artist so students could learn about Afghanistan in an after-school workshop. A first grade teacher wrote that her students had been saved by a particular group of firemen, and they wanted to thank the firemen who had saved them, and for that they needed musical instruments. There were hundreds of these projects related to 9/11 recovery. And I thought that local media would jump on this story. This is when people yearned for a tangible way to participate in the recovery effort. The Red Cross had almost too many donations, and here was this way for people to help directly. But no local reporter would give me the time of day. I think I cold called 100 of them with no success. So I figured I should aim higher. The Holy Grail was the New York Times. They had this new reporter covering philanthropy and nonprofits. Her name was Stephanie Strom. I knew that if we could get Stephanie to do a story about us, we would have a shot at big-time impact. So I put together a package of materials, and I mailed them to Stephanie Strom. I waited a couple weeks. I didn't hear back. So I called her up. I said, "Hey, did you get those materials?" And she said, I did get the materials, but you're awfully small potatoes. If ever I'm doing a list of online charities, maybe I could reference you, but you're awfully small. Call me when you're for real." Damn. So I figured then I would go to Newsweek, and I got a list of the top editors at Newsweek, and I called up Jonathan Alter, the senior editor. I called him because with a last name beginning with A, he came up first in the alphabetical directory. I called him during my lunch hour, and his assistant must have been out to lunch herself, so he picked up the phone. And I said, "Hey, I'm a teacher in the Bronx. I started a nonprofit with my students. Do you want to hear about it?" And he said, "Sure." He didn't hang up on me. We talked for 45 minutes, and that night, he published a column on the Newsweek website saying that he thought one day this experiment growing out of a Bronx classroom would change philanthropy. So I called up Stephanie Strom, all excited, the New York Times reporter. And I said, "Hey, Newsweek thought we were worthy, at least for their website, so won't you give us a second look?" Well, then she dashed my hopes. She said, "Well, now I'm not going to touch your story with a 10-foot pole. since another reporter has already covered you. The New York Times does not follow in the footsteps of other publications. I felt like such an idiot for having told her that another reporter had broken the story of our site. So I wrote her an email apologizing for my stupidity, and she felt bad, so she wrote back saying, "Don't worry, you didn't have a chance in the first place because my editors have asked me to focus strictly on charities responding to 9/11. Well, so there was my last opening. I crafted an email to Stephanie Strom describing all of the 9/11 projects that teachers at the schools beside Ground Zero were posting on our site. And I called her up over the weekend. I made sure to call over the weekend so I wouldn't interrupt her if she was on deadline. And I left her this voicemail saying, "I've sent you this email. This is the last time you're going to hear from me. All I ask is that you read this one final pitch." On Monday, I was back at school teaching, and I checked my email between periods, and she had written me back. She said she wanted to do an interview for a major feature story in the New York Times. Let me tell you, I was over the moon. My parents raised me to be humble, but at this moment, the skies had opened, and I had to shout. I forwarded Stephanie Strom's email to my friend, and I said, "Guess who wouldn't touch our story with a 10-foot pole and now wants an interview? That's what hustling will do for you." I pounded my chest. I talked all kinds of smack. I wasn't forwarding that email to my friend. I was replying. The moment I realized I pulled the cord out of the computer, I pulled the cord out of the wall, but I was too late. I sent that trash-talking email to Stephanie Strom, philanthropy reporter for the New York Times. You didn't know I was going to tell you the most awful and embarrassing thing I've ever done in my life, but I figured I should work that in. So naturally, I sent Stephanie another email apologizing once again for my stupidity. And to Stephanie's eternal credit, she did not hold it against me. She eventually wrote a feature story in the New York Times suggesting that DonorsChoose.org might be the future of philanthropy. So we've tried since then to prove her right. More than 800,000 people have given over $100 million to classroom projects from teachers at half of all the public schools in America. There are more than 6 million kids from low-income families who've got books, art supplies, field trips, technology through our site. I never dreamed that I would be at West Virginia University with you sharing numbers like that. So here's how it works. When a teacher submits a project for funding, we first make sure it's legit, and we email follow-up questions to the teacher if anything is unclear about the student learning that will take place. This school year alone, we're going to get 125,000 project submissions, each of which needs to be reviewed and authenticated. That represents a heck of a lot of work, and we used to pay people to do it. Then we realized we could enlist our best teacher users to vet other teachers' project requests. So now, if you're a teacher and you've had 20 projects funded through our site, you're then invited to donate your time vetting other teachers' project requests. If you prove yourself to be a super responsible, awesome user, you're then given this privilege. It's kind of like when Tom Sawyer convinced his friends that whitewashing his fence was this thing that they should be super excited about. You could also think of it as a cross between Wikipedia and academic peer review. And now that we crowdsource this labor instead of paying people to do it, the average time it takes to vet and post a project has gone from 10 days to 1.5 days. That's the power of crowdsourcing, of asking your users to become your coworkers. So now the project's up on DonorsChoose.org. At any given moment, there are 25,000 projects live on our site. That's a lot to pick from, so we encourage our donors to express their personal passion, the town where they grew up, their favorite book as a kid, the sport they played in high school, and look at projects that match. A couple years ago, a writer for Fortune was doing a story on Kiva and DonorsChoose.org as the two websites that Fortune magazine thought were going to shake up philanthropy. The writer was decently impressed by our website, but at the end of the interview, he said that the cause dearest to his heart was saving the salmon in the Pacific Northwest, which is to say he was not planning to make a donation at DonorsChoose.org. But before he left the room, I did a keyword search for salmon, and up came 5 classroom projects. The second project, the second result, was from a high school teacher in Oregon who had created a salmon hatchery in the river flowing by his school, and he needed hip waders for his students to maintain and build out the hatchery. The top result was a project from a teacher on an island off Alaska, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. She wrote in her project essay that she was 45 minutes away from the nearest store by airplane, and all of her students are Native Alaskans, and they had recorded their parents' folk tales about salmon, done research on salmon. They wanted to share that work with the outside world, and for that, they needed a printer and a scanner. So here was this guy whose personal passion is salmon in the Northwest, and he had 5 projects to choose from. And as a result, a group of high school kids in Oregon now have the hip waders they need to build out a salmon hatchery. The last part of the process is the best part. When a project's funded, we don't hand out cash to the teacher. We purchase the resources and have them delivered to the classroom. And then every donor, even if they've given just $1, gets a thank you note from the teacher, photos of their project in action, an impact letter describing the student learning that's taking place, a cost report showing line by line how every dollar was spent. Donors who give $50 or more also get handwritten student letters. Our donors, no matter their donation size, get to see and feel the impact that they've made. They can even respond to the classroom's feedback. Throughout this process, we try to be radically transparent. I'll give you an example. Once in a while, a donor does not get the complete feedback experience because the classroom, for whatever reason, can't provide photos and thank you letters. Internally, we call this a jilted donor situation. And when it happens, we contact the donor and acknowledge that we've fallen short, even though they've probably forgotten that they were ever due a thank you package in the first place. And we invite them to pick another project to support on our dime. Sounds like a fall on your sword kind of thing to do, but most of our donors are blown away that we would proactively apologize for not providing that thank you package. They don't usually take us up on our offer of funding another project for them, but our apology note does often inspire them to make a whole new donation because they're just so impressed with the approach we take. We looked at the numbers once and concluded that our biggest revenue driver is screwing up and admitting it. So we've talked about how DonorsChoose.org began. We've talked about how it works, but our real story is the 230,000 teachers who use our site to improve their students' education. I want to tell you about one of those teachers. Debbie Gardino is a special education teacher in Chesapeake, Virginia. She became a special needs teacher because her son has Asperger's, and his doctors and his teachers said that he would never graduate, never be independent. Debbie believed otherwise, and her son proved otherwise. He now has a master's degree, and a few weeks ago, he got married. Debbie's had 70 classroom projects funded on our site, one of which was for touchscreen tablets that have let some of our students with cerebral palsy communicate for the first time. When Joplin, Missouri was hit by a tornado, Debbie took matters into her own hands. She flew to Joplin on her own dime, of her own volition, and went door to door telling any teacher who'd listen about DonorsChoose.org. Some of the teachers Debbie spoke to told her about a high school senior named Will Norton, who was driving back from graduation when he was sucked out of his car by the tornado. The way people spoke about this young man struck an especially deep chord with Debbie, so she dedicated her mission to him. Debbie inspired more than half of all the teachers in Joplin, Missouri to post 800 classroom projects on our site, 800 calls for help for rejuvenating Joplin classrooms. These projects requested playground equipment and classroom furniture in the classrooms that had been destroyed, first aid kits and flashlights, therapy resources like knitting needles and yarn, books and more books, musical instruments. 5,000 people across the country gave over $500,000 to fully fund nearly every Joplin project. The outpouring of emotion from Joplin teachers and their donors, the messages they posted back and forth, the thank you letters and photos was something to behold. At the reopening of Joplin schools, teachers greeted Debbie with screams of joy. Many of them had enough funded projects to have rebuilt their entire classrooms, even better than they were before. Debbie shows how someone can make a mark on the world, a major mark on the world, without going through gatekeepers. Tonight, I want to enable each of you to make a mark on the world. Maybe not at quite the heroic scale of Debbie, but a meaningful mark. Your university paid me a speaker's fee, and I want to invite each of you to spend my speaker's fee on a West Virginia classroom project that speaks to you. As Gretchen mentioned, on your way out the door, you're each going to be given a $10 DonorsChoose.org gift card to spend on the project of your choice. And to give you a flavor for how tough it'll be for you to make this choice, I want to show you just a few recently funded projects on our site. In Wheeling, a group of 8th graders recently got 10 award-winning books so they could experience the joy of reading. In Smithers, kindergartners recently got wood blocks so that they could have constructive play and build things, become our next engineers. In Sutton, a group of special needs students now have dance and movement recordings so they can get their groove back, in the words of their teacher, and express themselves when verbal communication is difficult. In Oak Hill, there's a group of students who are now hooked on science and the study of nature now that they have real-life specimens of tarantulas and scorpions and frogs and sea creatures. Spend your gift card on a classroom project that really speaks to you and see what a difference you can make. So what have we learned tonight? For one, perseverance and owning your mistakes can take you an awfully long way. Remember all that cold calling and never taking no for an answer that ultimately got us in Newsweek and the New York Times? How getting rejected by local reporters prompted me to set my sights even higher? At DonorsChoose.org, we call that relentlessness. It's our first core value, and it's what's behind just about every success we've had. Remember that terrible email I sent? Actually, please don't remember that email, but do remember how an authentic, unconditional apology can get someone back on your side. Do remember what DonorsChoose.org does when we can't provide photos in thank you letters for a funded project. Do remember how our donors actually reward us for owning our mistakes. Last point I want to make tonight. There's real reason to be optimistic about what lies after graduation. I'm not saying you shouldn't be worried about the lack of jobs out there, but I think you should also be excited about the new freedom you have to bring good ideas to life. At donorschoose.org, public school teachers go straight to the public with their best ideas for helping students learn. They don't have to get the sign-off of a higher-up. They don't have to first pay their dues. In fact, there's nothing standing between their idea and you as a potential supporter. That's what Kickstarter does for people who want to shoot a movie or record an album or build a video game. It's what Etsy does for people who love to make things by hand. All these sites, donorschoose.org, Kickstarter, Etsy, let so-called amateurs go public with their originality. And there'll be more such sites disrupting other sectors. We haven't even talked about Airbnb, one of my favorites, where you can rent out your spare bedroom or your treehouse or the airplane that you've retrofitted as an apartment. Just as you can find music on Kickstarter, which speaks to you more deeply than what's put out by a major record label, just as you can find products on Etsy that are made with more love than anything you could find at a retailer, you can find accommodations on Airbnb that have a lot more personality than any hotel room. In this new kind of marketplace, individuals can do incredible things. Think about Debbie Gardino and how she used donorschoose.org as a platform for massive personal impact. You don't have to be as saintly as Debbie, but I do hope you'll take part in this movement. Get your next album on Kickstarter, not iTunes. Buy your next accessory on Etsy, not Macy's. Become a citizen philanthropist on donorschoose.org. See what teachers throughout America and you can accomplish when there are no gatekeepers in your way. Thank you for your time tonight. I hope you'll stick around for questions. You've been an awesome audience. Thank you.
Or to one of the two microphones, feel free to come on down. Actually, I'll ask one, just to get things rolling. So, you've got some pretty high-profile people on your board, noticed, which is terrific. Stephen Colbert is one, which is kind of, a bit of a celebrity actor. We all know him from the Colbert Report. Talk about how did you score some of those people? What was the process? When did that begin? I mean, you've been going now for about 10 years now, so a little over 10 years. So how did that fall into place?
Yeah, hopefully that beginning video gave you a sense, as Gretchen just did, of some of the amazing people who've gotten involved with our site. Oprah came because of that Newsweek senior editor who I cold called during my lunch hour. He wrote a second piece, a little blurb in the actual physical Newsweek magazine, and some of Oprah's producers saw that little story. And the day that my students were better behaved than any other day was when Oprah's limo pulled up in front of Wings Academy, the high school where I was teaching, to come get me to go on the show. And she actually, she made an exception because I was a teacher, and she directly talked about donorschoose.org on air. Usually if she mentions a website, she wants people to go to oprah.com and find a link. But in our case, she told people to go straight to our website, which, of course, crashed us immediately and melted us down when 25,000 people simultaneously typed in our address. But we got back up after a couple hours and were able to attract a bunch of donations. Stephen Colbert was also kind of traces its roots back to relentlessness. Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist, has an incredible open-door policy to random people who send him cold emails. At least he did 9 or 10 years ago when I sent him an unsolicited email. And he was happy to have coffee with me. And he took a shine to donorschoose.org. And years later, when he went on the Colbert Report, he spent like 2 minutes talking about Craigslist and then 4 minutes talking about donorschoose.org, which was just a saintly thing for Craig Newmark to have done. And that got Stephen interested. He's done a number of crazy things with us. He held a philanthropic presidential straw poll on our site where you could donate to a classroom project in honor of your favorite candidate. And that donation would push your favorite candidate higher up in what Stephen Colbert called a straw poll that makes a difference. It was candidates duking it out with each other to see who could help more kids in public schools. I'll mention just one other thing that Colbert has done, and this is out of 10 wacky things he's done on our site. He had Steve Martin, the comedian, on his show about a year ago, and Steve Martin had just written a book on art appreciation. And Stephen, meanwhile, had a portrait of himself commissioned, which he petitioned to the National Portrait Gallery to hang in their building in Washington, D.C., which they did in the men's bathroom. And Stephen Colbert was very, very proud that his portrait had hung in the National Portrait Gallery, men's bathroom. And so he brought out this portrait and showed it to Steve Martin and asked Steve Martin if this was not a great work of art. And Steve Martin said, you know, I actually wouldn't spend my own money on that thing, not even $50. Whereupon some of the most famous living artists in the world, Shepard Fairey and Frank Stella, I don't actually know the art world, but my understanding is those people are famous. And they came onto the set, and they did doodles on the portrait. They signed it. One of them drew a mustache on Stephen. Another one did some graffiti and turned it into a very valuable work of art. So Stephen then announced that he was going to auction off this portrait with all the proceeds going to art projects on donorschoose.org. And he did a series of shows where he got the very fancy auction house, Simone de Pury, to auction off this portrait. And he said some hilarious things to the art buyers. And at the end of the show, where it was revealed that the portrait had gone for $26,000, all of which was going to go to art projects on our site, Stephen Colbert announced that his best friend for 6 months, Jimmy Fallon, they had agreed to become best friends forever for a 6-month trial period. And he announced that his best friend for 6 months, Jimmy Fallon, was going to be matching the $26,000 with a personal donation to art projects on our site. And the Twitter sphere just lit up with people proclaiming Jimmy Fallon's generosity and philanthropy. And the next morning, Stephen called me. He doesn't call me that often, but when he does, I like to gratuitously mention that he did. So Stephen Colbert called me the next morning, and he was giddy with excitement and kind of delight. And he said, Jimmy Fallon's never heard of donorschoose.org before. I just thought I would punk him by announcing on national television that he made a $26,000 donation to art projects on your site. And he was giddy because he didn't know how Jimmy Fallon was going to punk him back. Would Jimmy Fallon be announcing on his show that Stephen Colbert would be performing at his cousin's wedding? Or like, he was just so excited to see how Jimmy Fallon would get him back. But then they sort of met over the weekend and hugged it out. And on the next Jimmy Fallon show, Jimmy Fallon revealed to his viewers that, in fact, he was not this generous philanthropist. He had made no such $26,000 donation commitment, was only just learning about donorschoose.org. And Stephen Colbert bursts onto the set and said, I'm so hurt, Jimmy. What are best friends for 6 months for, if not to spend the other person's money without asking? He's like, I give and I give and I give, and all you do is take, Jimmy. Or actually said, I give and I give your money away without asking, and all you do is take. And long story short, Jimmy Fallon asked his viewers to make an honest man out of him by donating $26,000 with a match from NBC to art projects on our site. And the condition was that if Jimmy Fallon's viewers made an honest man out of him, then Stephen Colbert would have to go on the Jimmy Fallon show and record and perform Rebecca Black's Friday, the YouTube tween sensation. And it all happened. They did raise the money. Stephen Colbert did a killer cover of Rebecca Black's Friday. It is worth Googling and checking it out. Watch it on Hulu. So that's a long-winded answer.
That's okay. That's okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, we do right here.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks.
Hi, I'm a second grade teacher in Monongah, West Virginia. And I want to thank Donors Choose. I've had 3 projects funded in the last 2 years.
Sweet.
And I appreciate
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Do you want to share? Do you want to share what your projects were?
Sure. One was for an iPod, so I could have all the music in one apparatus instead of having a bunch of CDs. And then the last thing I got was a beautiful classroom carpet. I have like a Western theme, and it has a barnyard on it. And then a leveled library of books, because my books are very outdated, so truly appreciate it. It was wonderful.
Oh, it's a testament to your dedication to your students, so thank you. That's awesome.
First off, congratulations and thank you for the impact that you've had on the future generations of Americans. I can't tell you, I mean, it truly brings a tear to my eye to see what you've been able to do.
Thank you.
A couple of the things that, the future of America, infrastructure, education, and opportunity, and you showed one of the schools there was Oak Hill, West Virginia. Well, that was actually my elementary school. And that takes me back to when I was in elementary school there, and we had a great governor in this state that one of his main platforms was obviously education. He's one of the first people to talk about having a computer in every classroom. Well, I was that generation, and he put that computer there, and just giving us the opportunity to have access to that meant so much. But to take it one step further, and you're solving the problem, obviously, of the funding and giving the students the utensils. And just to pick your brain a little bit, how can we get students to realize that education is your opportunity of the future, as well as how can we get teachers bought in to realize how important what their job is and what they're doing, and more specifically, maybe what do you think about year-long schooling and its successes and failures around the country, as well as performance-based evaluations to hold teachers in schools accountable?
Some of those questions, thank you for those, I would defer to education policy experts, maybe even some of the professors who are here at West Virginia University. But on the subject of getting kids excited about learning, one reason why we're so excited about the projects on our site is that so many of them are dedicated not just to delivering the kind of base knowledge that you capture in a multiple choice test, but are about real-life specimens of tarantulas and sea creatures and scorpions so that students can develop a visceral love of learning. So many of the projects on our site are really focused on that. And in terms of teacher empowerment and, well, first, in terms of year-round schooling, you can actually search for projects on our site specifically at year-round schools. There are a million different search facets. I kind of alluded to the ability of someone to express a real personal interest with that salmon story. But you could say, I'm really interested in year-round schools. So I'd like to see the projects just from teachers at year-round schools, or at charter schools, or at magnet schools, or search for VOTEC. In terms of teacher performance, there's a debate that I'm sure you're alluding to between the teachers' union that might say that a lot of standardized tests are rote and kind of dumb down learning and encourage teaching to the test. And then you've got a reform camp that says, well, we need something objective by which to measure teachers, and this is what we've got. We got to go with it. There's a third way that we're exploring, specifically with the AP exam. And in fact, I wonder if the West Virginia governor you're referring to is not now the head of the College Board, which manages the AP program. And the advanced placement test is one of those tests that I think people really respect in terms of its ability to capture what a student has learned. And we're in conversations with a couple funders about potentially sending big DonorsChoose.org gift cards to those teachers whose low-income students score well on the AP exam. It's not about changing salaries, and it's specifically a test that people really believe in, but it kind of represents potentially a third way on teacher merit pay by enabling teachers who are clearly kicking butt in low-income communities as measured by student scores on the AP exam, but empowering them by enabling them to double down on what they're doing in the classroom, giving them classroom funding support as their recognition. Thanks for your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
again
much.
for your time. Remember to spend that gift card.
Yes.